You have my name and my protection, but do not expect me to ever love you." Alexander Blackwood's words fell across the bridal chamber before the last echoes of the wedding celebration had faded from the halls below. Emily Carter stood near the tall window, still wearing the ivory gown chosen for her by people who had planned nearly every detail of this day except how she was supposed to feel about it. For a moment, she said nothing. Alexander had expected tears, perhaps anger, perhaps the careful performance of an ambitious Omega finally standing inside the private chambers of an Alpha King. Instead, Emily slowly removed the silver pins from her dark brown hair and placed them on the table. "Then we finally agree on something," she said. Alexander's expression tightened. "You expect me to believe you did not want this?" Emily turned toward him. Her green eyes were tired, but steady. "I stopped expecting you to believe anything about me before we exchanged vows." The answer caught him off guard. 3 months earlier, the Carter pack had made its position clear. Without a marriage alliance, they would withdraw from the Northern Coalition, taking vital trade routes and several allied territories with them. Then Victoria Hale had shown Alexander a letter supposedly written by Emily herself, a letter boasting that once she became queen, he would have no choice but to accept her. From that moment, Alexander had known exactly what kind of woman he believed he was marrying. Or so he thought. "This marriage exists because your family demanded it," he said. "I know. You will have every protection required by your position. You will be treated with respect in public. But privately, we will live separate lives." Emily looked down at the wedding ring on her hand. Something unreadable crossed her face before disappearing. "That sounds fair." Fair. The word irritated him more than protest would have. "You have nothing else to say? Would it change anything?" Alexander remained silent. Emily gave a small nod, as though his silence had confirmed something she already knew. She walked toward the adjoining door. "Where are you going?" "To my room." "This is your room. Then I will find another one." For the first time that evening, Alexander truly looked at her. She did not resemble a victorious woman who had manipulated her way into a crown. She looked exhausted. Not disappointed. Not heartbroken. Simply exhausted. But suspicion was easier than uncertainty, and Alexander had spent years learning never to ignore a threat merely because it arrived with a gentle voice. "Emily." She stopped with her hand on the door. "Whatever game your family is playing, do not bring it into Blackwood." Her shoulders became still. When she turned back, there was no anger in her face. That somehow made her answer sharper. "Your Majesty, I crossed 200 miles, married a man who despises me, smiled for hundreds of strangers, and listened while everyone congratulated me on the happiest day of my life." Her voice remained calm. "I assure you, I am too tired for games." Then she opened the door and left. Alexander stood alone beneath the warm lights of a room prepared for 2 people who had already become strangers. He told himself her performance meant nothing. He told himself the letter had revealed the truth. He told himself he had every reason to distrust his new bride. But halfway down the silent corridor, Emily finally allowed her carefully controlled expression to break. She pressed one hand against the wall, closed her eyes, and forced herself to breathe. No one saw her. No one heard the words she whispered into the empty hallway. "I did what you asked." Then she straightened her shoulders and kept walking, unaware that somewhere far from Blackwood, the people who had sent her there were already preparing their next demand. 3 weeks after the wedding, Emily had learned exactly how quiet a castle could become when no one expected you to belong there. Every morning, she woke in a guest suite at the eastern end of Blackwood Castle, nearly 200 feet from Alexander's private rooms. Every evening, dinner was served at a table long enough for 20 people, yet most nights she sat at one end alone. Alexander was always occupied with council meetings, territorial disputes, or responsibilities that somehow lasted until after she had finished eating. Emily never asked whether that was deliberate. She already knew. The servants remained polite, but politeness was not acceptance. Conversations became quieter when she entered a room. Council members addressed her as Luna Queen while looking at Alexander for approval. Rumors moved through the castle faster than footsteps. The ambitious Omega, the Carter bride who had forced an Alpha King into marriage. The woman who wanted a crown badly enough to threaten an alliance. Emily heard every version and corrected none of them. On the 22nd morning of her marriage, she entered the breakfast room, and found Alexander already seated there. It was the first meal they had shared since the wedding. He looked up briefly from a stack of reports. "Good morning." "Good morning." Emily sat across from him. A servant immediately approached with coffee, but Emily smiled and thanked her before pouring it herself. Alexander noticed. He also noticed that Emily wore no expensive jewelry beyond her wedding ring. "The royal jeweler requested an appointment with you," he said. "I declined." Alexander lowered the report. "Why? I already own more jewelry than I need." "You are queen now." Emily took a sip of coffee. "Does the position require diamonds before breakfast?" Alexander almost reacted, but she had already returned her attention to the window. A few minutes later, Ethan Cole entered carrying another folder. "Your Majesty, the winter relief budget needs approval." Emily looked up. "Winter relief?" Ethan hesitated before answering her. Several families near the western boundary lost income after the mills closed. "How many?" Alexander watched the exchange. 37 households, Ethan said. Emily considered this. "And the emergency fund?" "Limited." She nodded slowly, then stood. "Thank you." Alexander frowned. "Where are you going?" "I have an appointment with the royal jeweler." By afternoon, Alexander learned that Emily had not gone to choose jewelry. She had asked for the value of the ceremonial collection assigned to her position and offered to redirect part of her personal allowance toward the Western families. Alexander summoned her to his study before dinner. "You cannot simply restructure royal funds without approval." Emily stood across from his desk. "I asked whether it was permitted. I was told my personal allowance was mine to use." "That is not the point." "Then what is?" Alexander searched her face for calculation and found only confusion. "People will think you are trying to win their loyalty." Emily was silent for a moment. "And if hungry families receive groceries and heating fuel, should I care why strangers think I did it?" The question left him without an immediate answer. Emily turned toward the door. "Was there anything else?" "No." She nodded and left. Later that evening, Alexander passed the formal dining room and saw a single place setting beneath the chandelier. Emily was not there. He found her in the servants' kitchen, sitting at a small wooden table while an elderly housekeeper taught her how Blackwood prepared apple pie. Emily was laughing, not performing, not watching to see who noticed, simply laughing. Alexander remained unseen in the doorway for several seconds. This woman asked for nothing. She demanded no authority. She had spent 3 weeks being treated like an unwanted guest and had answered by learning the names of the people everyone else overlooked. For the first time since the wedding, Alexander felt something more uncomfortable than hatred. Doubt. Then Victoria Hale appeared beside him and followed his gaze toward Emily. "She is clever," Victoria said quietly. "Women like her always know exactly how to make kindness look innocent." Alexander looked at Emily again. The doubt remained, but Victoria's words gave his suspicion somewhere familiar to hide. Alexander had seen the letter only once, but he remembered every word. It had arrived 6 weeks before the wedding, delivered to Victoria Hale by a source she claimed was connected to the Carter household. "Once I become queen, he will have no choice but to accept me. The alliance will guarantee the marriage, and eventually Blackwood will belong to both of us." At the time, Alexander had needed no further explanation. The Carter pack had already threatened to withdraw from the Northern Coalition unless the marriage agreement moved forward. Their territory controlled nearly 80 miles of critical mountain roads, and losing their support could have destabilized trade between several neighboring packs. Alexander had accepted the marriage for his people. He believed Emily had accepted it for power. That belief had been simple, comfortable even. Then Emily arrived at Blackwood and refused to behave like the woman in the letter. 1 month after the wedding, Alexander stood at the rear of the council chamber while Emily spoke with representatives from the Western Territory. She had not been invited to address the meeting. She had only come to deliver updated relief figures. But when one council member dismissed the concerns of several Omega families, Emily stopped near the table. "With respect, 37 households are not a minor inconvenience." The room became quiet. Councilman Robert Pierce leaned back in his chair. "The matter is being handled." "Then why are 6 families still waiting for heating assistance?" Emily asked. Alexander watched Pierce's expression harden. "You have been queen for 1 month. That does not make winter any warmer." Ethan looked down, hiding what might have been a smile. Alexander did not. He studied Emily instead. She was not demanding influence. She was using the little access she had to speak for people who possessed even less. After the meeting, Alexander found her in the corridor. You embarrassed a senior council member. Emily continued walking. He will recover. That is not how political alliances work. She stopped. Is that what our marriage is? A lesson in protecting powerful people from uncomfortable questions. Alexander's patience tightened. You know exactly what our marriage is. Something changed in her expression. Do I? Your family made certain I had no reasonable alternative. Emily stared at him. For the first time, genuine confusion crossed her face. What did they tell you? Alexander hesitated. Do not pretend you were not involved. Her face became still again. Of course. She turned away. Emily. She stopped, but did not look back. You wanted this marriage, he said. It was not a question. For several seconds, the corridor remained silent. Then she answered quietly. If that is what you need to believe. She walked away before he could respond. That evening, Alexander entered his study and opened the locked drawer where he kept the letter. He read it again. The handwriting was elegant. The language confident. The signature unmistakable. Emily Carter. Yet he realized something he should have noticed weeks earlier. He had never actually seen Emily write anything. A knock interrupted him. Victoria entered without waiting for permission. Her eyes immediately moved toward the paper in his hand. You are reading that again. Alexander folded it. Where exactly did you get this? Victoria's expression remained calm. I told you. A reliable source. Who? Someone inside the Carter household. That is not a name. Victoria studied him. You are beginning to doubt me because she gave away a few dollars and smiled at the servants? Alexander's gaze sharpened. I asked a question. Victoria stepped closer to the desk. And I am reminding you what happened before she arrived. Her family threatened the coalition. That letter confirmed her intentions. Do not let a quiet voice make you forget facts. Alexander looked down at the folded page. Perhaps Victoria was right. Perhaps Emily was simply more careful than he had expected. But later that night, while passing the eastern wing, Alexander saw a light beneath Emily's door. Inside, unseen by him, she sat at a small desk writing a letter with trembling hands. Dear Lily, I hope they are treating you well. I am doing everything they asked. Please tell me you are safe. Emily finished the final sentence, signed her name, and sealed the envelope. Her handwriting looked nothing like the letter locked inside Alexander's desk. By the beginning of her second month at Blackwood, Emily had become familiar with the places no one expected a queen to visit. She knew which kitchen door stuck when the weather turned cold, which elderly housekeeper needed help carrying laundry upstairs, and which children from the western settlements always reached for the cinnamon cookies before anything else. Every Tuesday, she traveled with the relief staff to a community center 12 miles beyond the castle, where families affected by the mill closures collected groceries, heating supplies, and winter clothing. She never announced her visits. She never brought photographers. Most of the council did not even know she went. Alexander discovered it by accident. He had returned early from an inspection when he saw Emily stepping from a plain Blackwood vehicle near the service entrance, carrying an empty cardboard box. Where have you been? He asked. Emily stopped. Westbrook. Without an escort? There were 2 guards in the vehicle. That is not what I meant. She shifted the box beneath one arm. Then you will have to explain what you meant. Alexander looked at her practical boots, simple wool coat, and wind-reddened cheeks. Nothing about her resembled the ambitious woman he had expected to find decorating herself with royal privilege. Why Westbrook? They needed help organizing deliveries. We employ people for that. They were short on volunteers. Her answer came so naturally that Alexander almost felt foolish for asking. You are the Luna Queen. Emily met his eyes. Does that prevent me from carrying a box? Before he could answer, a little girl climbed out of the vehicle behind her and ran back toward Emily. You forgot this. She held out a folded paper drawing. Emily immediately crouched to accept it. I thought you were keeping it. I made another one. Emily smiled. Then I am honored. The girl hugged her briefly before returning to her mother. Alexander watched Emily unfold the drawing. It showed a large castle, several crooked trees, and a woman wearing a crown far too big for her head. Emily laughed softly. Alexander felt his certainty shift again. Later that afternoon, he found Ethan reviewing financial records. How much of Emily's personal allowance has she spent? Ethan looked surprised. On herself. In total. Ethan opened a file. Less than 8%. Alexander frowned. Where is the rest? Some went to the Western Relief Program. Most has been transferred to an account connected to the Carter territory. Suspicion returned immediately. Her family, possibly. Alexander thought of the letter. Perhaps the generosity was a distraction after all. Find out. Ethan hesitated. Quietly. Very. That evening, Emily attended a formal dinner with 6 council members. She wore the same simple silver earrings she had worn twice before. Victoria noticed. Surely Blackwood can provide its queen with something more appropriate. Emily placed her water glass down. These were my mother's. Victoria smiled without warmth. Sentiment is admirable, but appearances matter. Before Emily could respond, Alexander spoke from the head of the table. Then everyone should appear intelligent enough not to criticize my queen's jewelry. Silence followed. Emily looked at him in surprise. So did Alexander, almost. Victoria recovered first. Of course, Your Majesty. Dinner continued, but something had changed. Alexander had defended Emily without calculation. He told himself it was because Victoria had crossed a line of etiquette. Yet later, when he saw Emily alone in the corridor, he nearly stopped her. Nearly apologized. Nearly asked about the money being sent home. Instead, his old suspicion held him back. Emily entered her room and closed the door. Minutes later, a message arrived from the Carter territory. She opened it with shaking fingers. There was no greeting. No question about her marriage. Only one sentence. The next payment is due Friday if you want Lily to remain protected. Emily sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the words until the screen blurred. Then she transferred nearly everything remaining in her account and deleted the message. Across the castle, Ethan entered Alexander's study carrying the results of his investigation. I found where the money is going, he said. Alexander looked up. Ethan placed the file on his desk. And I do not think your wife is supporting her family. I think someone is making her pay them. Alexander stared at the file Ethan had placed on his desk. Explain. Ethan opened the first page. Every transfer Emily made went through a private account controlled by the Carter territory. The money was moved again within hours, so I traced the authorization records. And the account is connected to Margaret Carter. Alexander knew the name. Emily's stepmother had represented the Carter family during the marriage negotiations. Why would Emily send her almost everything she has? I do not know yet, but these payments began before the wedding. Ethan pointed to several dates. They increased after Emily arrived here. Alexander looked toward the dark windows. The evidence should have answered questions. Instead, it created more. Keep investigating. Should we ask Emily? Not yet. Ethan studied him. Because you do not trust her? Alexander did not answer. After Ethan left, he remained in the study until nearly midnight, reading every transaction twice. Eventually, unable to concentrate, he walked through the silent castle. He was passing the glass doors leading to the greenhouse when he noticed a light inside. Emily sat alone on a bench surrounded by sleeping winter roses. She had not seen him. A letter rested in her hands. Alexander almost entered, but then he heard a sound so quiet he initially mistook it for the rain against the glass. Emily was crying. Not loudly. Not in the way people cried when they wanted someone to come running. She covered her mouth with one hand, fighting to keep every sound inside. Alexander stopped. In 2 months of marriage, he had seen her challenged, insulted, ignored, and treated like a stranger in the home that now carried her name. She had never broken. Not once. Now there was no audience. No political advantage. No one to impress. Only a young woman sitting alone beneath dim lights, trying to make herself silent even in grief. Emily looked down at the letter again. I did what you asked, she whispered. Alexander became completely still. I sent the money. I married him. Please just leave my sister alone. The words struck harder than any accusation could have. Emily pressed the letter against her chest and closed her eyes. Lily has nothing to do with this. Alexander felt the assumptions of the past months begin to shift beneath him. The transfers. The marriage agreement. Emily's silence whenever he accused her of wanting the crown. Her question in the corridor. What did they tell you? He had believed she refused to answer because she was hiding ambition. What if she had been hiding fear? Alexander took one step toward the door, then stopped. For the first time, he did not know whether his presence would comfort her or make the moment worse. That realization brought a shame he was not prepared for. He was her husband, yet she had more reason to hide her pain from him than to seek his help. Emily wiped her face carefully and folded the letter. Within seconds, the composed expression he knew had returned. Alexander stepped back into the shadows before she opened the greenhouse door. She passed within several feet of him without knowing he was there. He watched her disappear down the corridor. Then he entered the greenhouse and saw a small piece of paper on the floor beneath the bench. It must have slipped from the envelope. Alexander picked it up. There were only 4 handwritten words. Friday is your deadline. He returned to his study and immediately called Ethan. I want everything on Margaret Carter. Every account, every message, every person connected to these payments. Ethan heard something unfamiliar in his voice. How quickly? Alexander looked toward the eastern wing, where Emily had once again gone to face the night alone. Before Friday. By Thursday morning, Alexander knew more about Emily's life than she had ever chosen to tell him, and every new fact made his previous certainty harder to defend. Ethan stood across from his desk with a folder that had grown twice as thick overnight. Lily Carter is 19, he said. Emily's younger half-sister. Their father died 4 years ago, and Margaret took control of the family estate afterward. Alexander turned a page. Why does Lily need protection? Because she is financially dependent on Margaret. Housing, education, medical care, everything. Emily has been paying Margaret to guarantee Lily remains supported. Alexander's expression hardened. Guarantee. That is the word used in several private messages we recovered. Ethan placed copies on the desk. Alexander read them in silence. Be cooperative. Remember who depends on you. Do not embarrass this family. Each message was carefully written to sound almost reasonable, but together they formed something unmistakable. Control. And the marriage? Alexander asked. Ethan hesitated. Emily refused it initially. The room became very quiet. How do you know? I found correspondence from the Carter attorney. She rejected the agreement twice. Alexander looked up slowly. Twice. The third time, Margaret added a condition. If Emily continued refusing, Lily would lose access to the family trust, and several smaller communities dependent on Carter funding would face immediate cuts. Alexander leaned back in his chair. The memory of his wedding night returned with brutal clarity. You wanted this marriage. If that is what you need to believe. He had mistaken resignation for guilt because guilt had been easier to hate. There is more, Ethan said. Emily has been sending almost her entire Blackwood allowance home because Margaret claims Lily's expenses have increased. Have they? No, Alexander closed the folder. Where is Lily now? At a private college about 160 miles south of Carter territory. She appears safe, but Margaret controls every account connected to her. Alexander stood. Change that. Ethan blinked. Immediately. Set up independent protection and financial support through Blackwood. Quietly. Margaret is not to know until Lily is beyond her control. Ethan nodded, then paused at the door. Alexander, there is something you should consider. What? Emily still does not know you are investigating. Alexander looked toward the windows. I know. That was the problem. He had spent weeks demanding honesty from a woman he had never made safe enough to trust him. That afternoon, he began noticing things he had previously ignored. Emily apologized when servants brought her anything she had not requested. She kept her phone face down whenever a message arrived. At lunch, she barely touched her food after receiving another notification. When Alexander entered the library unexpectedly, she closed the book in front of her as though preparing to defend her presence there. You do not need permission to use the library, he said. Emily looked genuinely surprised. I know, but they both understood that she had not known. Alexander wanted to tell her about Lily. He wanted to tell her that by tomorrow, Margaret would no longer control her sister's future. Yet something stopped him. Perhaps it was shame. Perhaps he understood that announcing one good deed would not erase 2 months of coldness. Emily, he said. She waited. Are you happy here? The question seemed almost absurd between them. Her expression softened, but not with affection. With sadness. Is that really what you want to ask me? Alexander had commanded entire councils without hesitation. Now one quiet question left him searching for words. No, he admitted. Emily looked at him more carefully, then asked the real one. He stepped closer, leaving several feet between them. Did you want to marry me? Her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Alexander finally saw the fear beneath the composure. Why does it matter now? She asked. Because I am beginning to think I was wrong. Emily gave a small, tired laugh. About which part? Before Alexander could answer, her phone vibrated on the table. She looked at the screen, and all color left her face. Alexander saw only the first line before she turned it over. Friday came early. Emily stood so quickly that her chair shifted backward. I have to go. Alexander moved aside rather than stopping her. She reached the door before he spoke. Emily. She froze. Whatever they are threatening you with, you do not have to face it alone anymore. Slowly, she looked back at him. Her eyes filled with something more painful than disbelief. You are 2 months too late to say that. Then she walked away, leaving Alexander with the truth he had finally become afraid to face. She did not distrust him because of what her family had done. She distrusted him because of what he had. Emily did not leave Blackwood Castle that afternoon. Alexander found her 20 minutes later in the small sitting room beside the eastern entrance, a packed suitcase standing near her feet. Where are you going? He asked. Emily did not look at him. Home. Why? Margaret says Lily is no longer at school. Alexander felt his chest tighten. Ethan had been arranging independent protection, but the process was not supposed to begin until that evening. Did you speak to Lily? Her phone is disconnected. Emily reached for the suitcase. I need to go. Alexander stepped aside from the doorway before she could mistake his presence for an attempt to stop her. Lily is safe. Emily froze. Slowly, she turned toward him. What did you say? Ethan confirmed her location less than 10 minutes ago. She left campus with 2 Blackwood security officers. Emily stared at him. Why would your people be with my sister? There was no gentle way to answer. Because I know about the payments. Her face changed immediately. You investigated me? Yes. Without asking me. Yes. Alexander refused to hide behind excuses. And I found out what Margaret has been doing. Emily's expression hardened. You had no right. I know. Do you? Her voice remained quiet, but every word carried 2 months of buried anger. You decided who I was before I arrived. You punished me for a story I never told. And now that you have decided I might be innocent, you investigate my life without permission. Alexander accepted the accusation without interruption. You are right. Emily seemed almost unsettled by the answer. Lily is being taken to a secure residence near Denver, he continued. She has independent access to funds Margaret cannot control. She can choose where she wants to live after that. Emily stared at him. Why? Because no one should be used to control you. Her eyes filled, but she refused to let the tears fall. You do not get to become kind now and expect me to forget everything. I do not. Then what do you want? Alexander looked at the woman he had spent weeks refusing to see clearly. The truth. Emily laughed once, without humor. You had the truth standing in front of you every day. I know. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Alexander asked the question that had haunted him since Ethan opened the file. You never wanted to marry me? Emily looked away. No, the answer should not have hurt. He had told her on their wedding night that he would never love her. Yet hearing that she had never wanted him either left an unexpected emptiness behind. I refused twice, she continued. Margaret told me Lily would lose everything if I refused again. Then she threatened to cut support to 3 communities that depended on Carter funding. Alexander's jaw tightened. Why did you never tell me? Emily looked directly at him. Would you have believed me? He opened his mouth, but no answer came. She nodded slowly. Exactly. Alexander lowered his eyes for the first time. No, he said. Emily went still. I would not have believed you. The admission seemed to change the air between them. I thought you wanted my title, he continued. I thought you helped force the alliance. I believed a letter that said you planned to use this marriage to gain power. Confusion crossed Emily's face. What letter? Alexander looked up. A letter signed with your name. I never wrote anything like that. I am beginning to understand that. Emily studied him, and realization slowly replaced confusion. Someone wanted you to hate me before I ever arrived. Alexander thought of Victoria. Yes. Emily sat down as if the weight of the past 2 months had suddenly become heavier. Alexander remained several feet away. He wanted to apologize, but the word felt too small. Lily will call you as soon as she reaches the safe residence, he said. After that, if you still want to leave Blackwood, no one will stop you. Emily looked at him. Even you. Alexander forced himself to answer the only way he could now. Especially me. At that moment, his phone vibrated. It was Ethan. Alexander answered and listened in silence. When the call ended, he looked toward Emily. Lily is safe. Emily closed her eyes. And for the first time since Alexander had known her, relief broke completely through her careful control. Then he placed his phone on the table, and Ethan found something else. Emily looked up. Alexander's expression darkened. The letter was forged. The forged letter changed everything, but Emily refused to let Alexander mistake truth for forgiveness. The following morning, she found him waiting outside the Eastern sitting room with a folder in his hand. He did not enter until she nodded. Ethan confirmed the handwriting was copied from official documents you signed before the wedding, Alexander said. The original file was created on a private council computer. Emily looked at the folder, but did not reach for it. Do you know who did it? Not yet. That was not entirely true. Alexander had suspicions, but suspicion had already cost them enough. This time, he wanted proof. Lily called, Emily said. Alexander's attention shifted immediately. Is she all right? She is confused, but safe. Emily looked down at her hands. She thought the money I sent came from Margaret. Alexander understood. Margaret had taken Emily's sacrifice and presented it as her own generosity. The Blackwood account is now in Lily's name, he said. No one else can control it. Emily looked at him carefully. Why are you doing this? Because it should have been done sooner. That is not an answer. Alexander took a slow breath. Because I failed you. The words seemed to surprise them both. I believed the worst about you because it was convenient. I treated your silence like proof. I made this place feel like another prison when it should have been the one place your family could not reach you. Emily's eyes lowered. And now I intend to make sure they never control you again. She looked up sharply. I do not need another man deciding what happens to my life. Alexander accepted the correction. You are right. He placed the folder on the table between them. Then you decide. Inside were documents separating Emily's finances from every Carter-controlled account, along with legal protections for Lily and the communities Margaret had threatened. Nothing required Emily's signature unless she chose to use it. I will provide whatever resources you request, Alexander said. But nothing moves without your permission. Emily studied the documents for a long time. You arranged all of this overnight? Ethan did most of the work. And what do you expect in return? The question hurt more than Alexander expected because he understood why she had asked it. Nothing. Emily gave him a tired look. People with power always say that before the price appears. Alexander remained still. Then do not trust my words. She looked at him. Watch what I do. Later that afternoon, Emily attended the Western Relief meeting and discovered that Alexander had removed every restriction previously placed on her personal charitable budget. He had also assigned an independent financial advisor who answered directly to her, not to the council. He never appeared at the meeting. He never asked whether she noticed. That evening, she found him alone in the library. You changed the relief budget. You said 37 families needed help. You argued with me about it. I was wrong. Emily almost smiled at the unfamiliar simplicity of the admission. Almost. You cannot erase 2 months of cruelty with one act of kindness. Alexander closed the book in his hands. I know. Or 10. I know that too. Then what exactly are you trying to do? Alexander met her eyes. Become someone who would have believed you. Emily had no immediate answer. For the first time, his apology did not sound like a request for absolution. He was not asking her to comfort him or reward his guilt. He was simply accepting that trust, if it ever came, would arrive on her terms. Emily turned to leave, then stopped. Alexander. It was the first time she had spoken his name without anger or ceremony. He looked up. Thank you for helping Lily. Alexander nodded. You never have to thank me for protecting someone who should have been safe already. Emily left before he could see the conflict in her expression. Alexander remained in the library long after the door closed. Then Ethan entered carrying a sealed envelope. We traced the computer used to create the forged letter. Alexander stood. Whose was it? Ethan placed the evidence on the table. Victoria Hales. Alexander read the evidence twice before looking at Ethan. Bring Victoria to the council chamber tomorrow morning. Ethan nodded. Do you want Emily there? Alexander considered the question. 2 months earlier, he would have made the decision for her. Ask her. The next morning, Emily entered the council chamber by choice. Victoria was already seated at the long table, composed as always, until Ethan placed copies of the digital records before her. Alexander remained standing. The forged letter came from your private council computer. Victoria barely glanced at the evidence. Computers can be accessed by anyone. Not this one, Ethan said. The security records confirm your credentials were used, and the document contains language copied from confidential Carter files you personally requested. Victoria looked toward Alexander. You cannot seriously believe I created this. Alexander's expression did not change. I believed you once without enough evidence. I will not repeat that mistake. Victoria's eyes moved to Emily. This is what she wanted. She has spent months turning you against everyone who protected you before she arrived. Emily remained silent. Alexander noticed the old instinct rising inside him, the temptation to answer manipulation with anger. He refused it. Why? He asked instead. Victoria's composure finally shifted. Because the Carter alliance was a mistake. Their family was unstable. Their influence threatened everything we built. So you made me believe Emily arranged the marriage for power. I gave you a reason to remain cautious. Alexander looked at the forged letter. You gave me a lie. Victoria stood. And you chose to believe it. The room went completely still. Emily looked at Alexander. Victoria seemed to realize too late that she had said something more truthful than she intended. Alexander nodded slowly. Yes. Victoria blinked. What? You gave me the lie, he said. I chose to believe it. He turned toward Emily. I chose not to ask questions. I chose to judge her before I knew her. I chose cruelty when distance would have been enough. Emily held his gaze, surprised by the absence of excuses. Alexander looked back at Victoria. Your actions were calculated, dishonest, and an abuse of your position. But what happened inside my marriage belongs to me. Victoria's confidence disappeared. By noon, the council voted to suspend her authority pending a full investigation. Alexander did not celebrate. There was no satisfaction in learning that another person had helped create his mistake when he could still remember every moment he had willingly continued it. That evening, he found Emily on the terrace overlooking the mountains. Victoria has been removed from the council, he said. I heard. The investigation may uncover more. Emily nodded. Alexander stood several feet away. I owe you an apology that does not ask you to forgive me. She looked at him. Then why say it? Because you deserve to hear me admit what I did. The evening wind moved through the trees below. I was wrong about you before you ever entered this castle. I treated you like an enemy because believing a letter was easier than questioning my own anger. When your actions contradicted everything I believed, I searched for reasons to distrust them instead of reconsidering myself. Emily's expression remained guarded, but she listened. I am sorry, Alexander said. Not because Victoria lied. Because I decided her lie was enough to justify how I treated you. Emily looked toward the mountains. I wanted to hate you. Alexander said nothing. It would have been easier, she continued. Then you helped Lily. You changed the accounts. You started listening. And now I do not know what I feel. You do not have to know. Emily looked back at him. What if I never forgive you? The question hurt, but Alexander answered without hesitation. Then I will still be sorry. Something in her expression softened, but only for a moment. There is something I need to ask you tomorrow. You can ask me now. Emily shook her head. Not yet. She walked toward the doors, then stopped beside him. Alexander, if you truly mean what you said about giving me a choice, I need you to prove it. He turned toward her. Emily met his eyes with quiet certainty. Because what I am going to ask you may cost you your queen. Emily asked Alexander to meet her in the council chamber the following morning. No advisors waited inside. No guards stood near the table. She had chosen the room because it was where their marriage had been negotiated months earlier, long before either of them had been asked what they wanted. Alexander arrived precisely at 9 and found a single document resting in front of Emily. He recognized it before he reached the table. You want an annulment. Emily looked at him. I want my freedom. The words should not have surprised him. He had promised her that choice. Still, something inside him tightened. Is that what you truly want? I do not know. Alexander frowned slightly. Emily continued before he could speak. That is exactly why I need to leave. I do not know which feelings are mine anymore. I married you because Margaret gave me no choice. I stayed because Lily needed protection. Then you changed, and suddenly I started wondering whether this marriage could become something different. Her voice remained steady, but her hands were clasped tightly beneath the table. I cannot discover whether I want you while I am still your wife because someone else decided I had to be. Alexander looked down at the document. Every instinct shaped by his position told him to solve the problem. Offer time. Offer another residence. Offer anything that would keep her within reach. But love, he was beginning to understand, could not be another elegant name for control. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Emily seemed surprised. "Your signature." Alexander picked up the pen. For one brief second, his hand stopped above the page. Then he signed. Emily stared at the signature. "That is all." Alexander placed the pen down. "Did you want me to refuse?" "No." "Then I will not make your freedom harder simply because losing you is difficult for me." Her eyes lifted sharply. It was the closest he had come to admitting what had been growing between them. Alexander forced himself to continue. "The legal process will take several weeks. You may remain here as long as you want, or leave today. Your accounts are yours. The relief programs you created will continue receiving funding. Lily's protection does not depend on our marriage." Emily swallowed. "You already arranged that?" "Yesterday. You knew I might ask to leave? I knew you should be able to." Silence filled the chamber. Emily looked at the man she had married and realized that the version of him she had once feared would never have signed that document. That truth made leaving harder, not easier. By afternoon, her suitcase was packed. The castle staff gathered near the eastern entrance, many of them openly emotional. The elderly housekeeper from the kitchen hugged Emily before remembering protocol and apologizing. Emily hugged her again. Alexander watched from several feet away. He did not ask Emily to stay. When her car arrived, she turned toward him. "I thought this would feel different." "How?" "Like escaping." Alexander absorbed the word without defending himself. "And does it?" Emily looked back at Blackwood Castle. "No." "Then perhaps you are not escaping." She met his eyes. "Perhaps you are choosing." Emily nodded slowly. "What will you do now?" Alexander almost smiled. "Learn how to eat dinner at a table built for 20 people. A small laugh escaped her before sadness returned. "Goodbye, Alexander." He wanted to tell her not to make it permanent. He wanted to tell her that somewhere between finding her alone in the greenhouse and hearing her say his name without anger, he had fallen in love with her. But those words, spoken now, could become another weight placed on her choice. "Goodbye, Emily." She entered the car. Alexander remained at the entrance until it disappeared beyond the gates. Only then did Ethan approach. "You could have asked her to stay." Alexander looked toward the empty road. "She has spent too much of her life being asked to sacrifice what she wants for everyone else." "And what do you want?" Alexander was silent for a long moment. "Her." Ethan waited. Alexander turned back toward the castle that suddenly seemed far larger than it had that morning. "Which is exactly why I had to let her go." The first evening without Emily, Alexander sat alone at the dining table and finally understood how long silence could last. Her chair remained empty across from him, though she had rarely occupied it during the first weeks of their marriage. Back then, he had considered her absence convenient. Now every empty place seemed to accuse him of noticing too late. 3 weeks passed. The annulment moved quietly through the legal process, and Alexander returned to governing Blackwood with the same discipline he had always possessed. At least, that was what everyone saw. He attended council meetings. He reviewed trade agreements. He visited the western settlements. But everywhere he went, he found evidence that Emily had been there first. The relief center now served twice as many families because of the system she had created. The kitchen staff still prepared apple pie every Tuesday because Emily had turned the tradition into a weekly gathering. At Westbrook, the little girl who had once given Emily a drawing asked Alexander when the Queen was coming back. He had no answer. "She helped my mom find work," the girl said. "She said people should not feel embarrassed when they need help." Alexander looked around the crowded community center and realized Emily had built something more lasting than influence. She had made people feel seen. That evening, Ethan found him reviewing the latest reports from the Omega Assistance Program. "You have read that page 4 times. Alexander placed it down. "Have I?" "Yes." Ethan sat across from him. "You miss her." Alexander looked toward the window. "That does not give me the right to interfere with her life." "I did not say it did." Alexander was quiet. "Do you know where she is?" Ethan hesitated. "I know she is safe." "That was not my question." "No, but it is the only answer you asked me to make sure I could give." Alexander almost smiled. He had specifically ordered Ethan not to track Emily's movements unless her safety was at risk. Even now, part of him hated that decision. The better part knew it was necessary. 2 more weeks passed before a letter arrived. It was not from Emily. It came from Lily. Alexander opened it in his study. She thanked him for helping her become independent, then wrote something that stopped him. Emily is building a support center in a small town called Pine Haven. She thinks you do not know because she wants to prove she can build something without being a queen. She is doing well. But sometimes, when she thinks I am not looking, she still wears her wedding ring on a chain beneath her sweater. Alexander read the final sentence twice. Hope came first, then restraint. Emily wearing the ring did not mean she wanted him to appear at her door. Love did not turn uncertainty into permission. He folded the letter and placed it inside his desk. The following morning, however, an invitation arrived from Pine Haven. The town council was opening a new Omega Resource Center and had formally invited the Alpha King because Blackwood funding supported several regional programs. Alexander stared at the invitation for a long time. You are going, Ethan said from across the desk. It would be politically appropriate. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Of course. 2 days later, Alexander arrived in Pine Haven without a royal convoy. One car. No council members. No ceremony. He entered the newly renovated community center and immediately saw Emily across the room. She was laughing with Lily while arranging books on a shelf. She looked different. Lighter. Free. Alexander stopped before she noticed him. For the first time, he understood that loving her did not mean wanting her back inside his castle. It meant wanting this version of her to survive, even if her happiness had no place for him. Then Emily looked up. The smile disappeared from her face, replaced by surprise. Alexander remained where he was, giving her every opportunity to walk away. Instead, Emily slowly crossed the room. What are you doing here? She asked. Alexander held up the invitation. For once, I was actually invited. A reluctant smile touched her face. Then silence settled between them. Alexander looked around at everything she had built. You did this. With help. You always say that. Emily studied him. Why did you really come? Alexander could have hidden behind politics. He chose not to. Because I wanted to see you. Her expression changed. And now that you have, Alexander met her eyes. Now I know I was right to let you leave. Emily's face fell before he continued. Because this is the first time I have ever seen you standing somewhere that was entirely your choice. Emily held his gaze for several seconds. Around them, volunteers moved through the community center, carrying boxes, arranging chairs, and preparing for the afternoon opening. But the space between Emily and Alexander felt strangely separate from everything else. You really mean that? She said. Yes. Alexander looked around the room again. You built something because you wanted to build it. No council ordered you to. No family threatened you. No title required it. His eyes returned to hers. I would never ask you to give that up. Emily folded her arms, not defensively, but thoughtfully. Then what are you asking? Alexander had rehearsed several answers during the 2-hour drive to Pine Haven. None of them felt right anymore. Nothing today. She frowned. You came all this way to ask nothing? I came because I wanted to see you. I stayed because there is something I need to say. Emily waited. Alexander took a slow breath. I am not here to ask my wife to return to Blackwood. The word wife hung between them, already becoming part of a past neither could completely erase. I am here to ask Emily Carter if, someday, she might allow me the chance to know her. Her expression softened, but uncertainty remained. You already know me. Alexander shook his head. I know what you do when people need help. I know you drink coffee without sugar and pretend not to like apple pie even though you always take a second piece. I know you become quiet when you are afraid someone will use your feelings against you. Emily looked away. But I do not know what you wanted before everyone started deciding your life for you, he continued. I do not know where you would travel if no one needed you. I do not know what makes you laugh when you are not worried about who is listening. He paused. I would like to learn. If you want me to. Emily looked back at him. And if I say no? Then I leave Pine Haven tomorrow, and you never have to explain your decision. Just like that. Just like that. She studied his face as if searching for the hidden condition she had spent most of her life expecting. There was none. The annulment becomes final next week, she said. Alexander felt the familiar ache, but nodded. I know. You are not going to stop it. No surprise crossed her face. Why? Because if there is ever anything between us again, I do not want it built on the agreement that trapped you the first time. Emily's eyes filled with emotion, but this time she did not hide it. You have changed. Alexander looked down briefly. I am trying. That is not the same thing. No, he met her eyes again. But I hope it is a beginning. Lily called Emily from across the room, asking where several donated books belonged. Emily glanced back, then returned her attention to Alexander. I have work to do. I know. You can stay for the opening. Alexander smiled faintly. Is that an order? For the first time, Emily laughed freely in front of him. Consider it an invitation. That afternoon, Alexander stayed in the background while Emily opened the center. He watched her speak with families, volunteers, and local leaders without once stepping forward to claim any connection to what she had accomplished. When evening came, Emily found him helping Ethan carry folding chairs into a storage room. I never imagined the Alpha King stacking chairs. Neither did I. She smiled. There is a diner about half a mile from here. Alexander waited. Emily took a breath. I usually have dinner there on Fridays. Hope rose inside him, but he kept his voice steady. That sounds nice. You could come with me. Alexander looked at her carefully. As your husband? Emily touched the thin chain beneath her sweater where her wedding ring still rested unseen. No, she held his gaze. As Alexander. For the first time, that was enough. 6 months after the annulment became final, Emily returned to Blackwood Castle through the same eastern gates she had once watched disappear behind her. This time, no agreement required her presence. No family waited for proof that she had obeyed. No title belonged to her unless she wanted it. Alexander stood at the entrance alone. He had known she was coming, but he had not sent guards to meet her on the road or prepared a formal reception. Over the past 6 months, he had learned that Emily preferred arrivals without audiences. You are early, he said as she approached. You sound disappointed. Terrified, actually. I planned at least 3 more minutes to appear calm. Emily smiled. It was the kind of smile Alexander had once seen only when she believed he was not watching. Now it came easily. Their beginning after Pinehaven had been deliberately ordinary. Dinner at a small diner became another dinner 2 weeks later. Alexander visited the resource center without turning every trip into official business. Emily returned to Blackwood occasionally and discovered that the castle no longer felt like a prison because she always knew she could leave. They learned each other slowly. Alexander learned that Emily wanted to see the Pacific Ocean in winter, hated overly sweet coffee, and sang quietly when she thought she was alone. Emily learned that Alexander read history when he could not sleep, secretly remembered every staff member's birthday, and was terrible at making apple pie despite repeated lessons. Trust returned in moments too small for anyone else to notice. Alexander never asked her to remarry him. That was why Emily had come. She followed him through the castle until they reached the bridal chamber where their story had begun. The room looked different now. The decorations from their first wedding were gone. Sunlight filled the windows. Emily stood near the same table where she had once removed the silver pins from her hair while Alexander told her never to expect his heart. Do you remember what you said to me here? She asked. Alexander's expression changed. Every word. So do I. He lowered his eyes. If I could take them back, I would. I would not. Alexander looked at her in surprise. Emily stepped closer. Because if you erased the man you were, you would also erase the man who chose to become better. She reached beneath her sweater and removed the chain she had worn for months. The old wedding ring rested against her palm. Our first marriage belonged to everyone except us. Alexander looked at the ring, but did not touch it. Yes. I do not want that marriage back. Pain crossed his face before Emily continued. I want something new. Alexander became completely still. Emily smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. I spent most of my life believing love meant owing someone something. Then I met a man who hurt me because he did not understand me. She paused. And somehow, that same man became the first person willing to lose me rather than keep me without my choice. Alexander's voice was quiet. Emily, whatever life I choose, I want you in it. For several seconds, the Alpha King who could address hundreds without hesitation could not speak. Finally, he reached for her hand, not the ring. Are you certain? Emily laughed softly. You really learned to ask. I had a very patient teacher. Months later, they married again in the gardens at Blackwood. There were no political agreements waiting to be signed. Lily stood beside Emily. Ethan stood beside Alexander. The Western families Emily had helped were among the guests, along with the castle staff who had become her friends long before she realized it. When Alexander looked at his bride, he did not see an omega sent to secure an alliance. He saw the woman who had taught a king that love, without freedom, was only another kind of cage. And when Emily took his hand, she was not returning to the life others had chosen for her. She was choosing one for herself. Their first marriage had begun with Alexander promising he would never love her. Their second began with no promises of perfection, only something far more difficult and far more real. Every day that followed, they would remain free to choose differently. And every day, they chose each other.